Hello and welcome to FabCity Now. My name is Danny Beesley and I'm the host here. This is our first podcast in what is hope to be a long series where we are talking about what a Fab City is and bringing in conversations and people and interviewing companies and individuals and community members around this idea of Fab City. And just to kind of define that for everybody, what a FabCity is an initiative that was started from the Fab Foundation and a cluster of Fab Labs ultimately in Barcelona, but it's a global initiative now. There's about 30 cities and regions around the world that have signed on to this commitment. And what it is it's a commitment to move cities towards complete self-sustainability, self-sufficiency, or circular economy. So we're talking about literally producing everything that we consume within city bounds. And the official initiative for FabCity has set a goal of 50% of total consumption by the year 2054. So there are a lot of people that are working on various problems, but when we talk about everything, the goal is literally everything. And this is not something that's going to happen with even existing technology, the existing means of production, our economic models, our workforce development models. All of those have to evolve pretty dramatically in order to really achieve this vision of producing everything locally that you consume. And so today we have brought on a guest as a friend and as well as an advisor to the FabCity Oakland or FabCity Bay Area initiative here in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is Shani Keck from City Community Investing and Development. And she's a vice president with them and really helping to connect up the community and bring in resources and funding to really support equitable community development. So I'd just like to introduce Shani Keck here and give her a second to introduce herself.
Hi, how are you, Danny? I love your tools.
Thank you. I had to find the best backdrop I could find here at my house.
I'm Shani Keck. I am I'm City Community Investing and Development's Community Relations Officer for the East Bay. We have been working on initiatives in 3 markets that work with manufacturing, both in New York. We worked quite a bit to build up an organization and a regional initiative in San Francisco, and most recently our work with you guys. We prioritize manufacturing as a sector, partially from a business development perspective, understanding how small manufacturers and makers can formalize and actually enter the market, or at a minimum, have an easy time of it. Additionally, these types of initiatives are really interesting from a workforce perspective because it allows for people who traditionally don't enter the market and have been left out of the market as manufacturing has been offshored to come back in. And for Oakland, one of the most important pieces has been equity. We've been able, through watching you guys grow, to really prove out that there is a very strong Black and minority ethnic group of producers here. There's a lot of incredible Latinx producers here, as well as Native and Asian, and not usually do you see those faces and those races involved in manufacturing. Increasingly, it's been a conversation of kind of people who can afford to enter it into it as a profession or as a small business. And so what I think we've seen in Oakland has been tremendous in terms of just raw roots and material and potential. And taking it to the next level has been something that's looked really interesting and has multiple benefits, both for the economy, but also just for mental health in times like this. It's nice to make, and it's nice to make money making.
Really. And as far as your personal background, why do you care about community development in the first place?
Oh dear. I have been a social justice activist for most of my life, actually. Economic development to me is really the central part of the work, the ability to ensure that everybody's got the resources allocated to achieve their potential, from birth all the way through till they're done producing at 90, making sure that the communities and the institutions that they grow up in and around are ensuring that they're investing in the people that that need it the most so that we can all thrive and we have an economy that benefits everybody. Manufacturing in particular has been really important to me because after living and working in the UK for 11 years, I was able to see what happens when you do it wrong and what those roots taught me in different communities about how important those jobs were back in the day and how much they meant to the communities that those factories were a part of. And the one thing I heard over and over again is how important skilled labor is to building community and being central to the locations where those places are, whether it's a fab lab now or a factory back in the day. It's where people meet, it's where people learn, it's where people trade, and ensuring that manufacturing remains present in the economy has bared out in all of the evidence. To say not only do we need to be self-sufficient to be able to grow the jobs and the businesses that we need, but as we've just recently found out, we have to be able to make some stuff on site and onshore because it takes a while when everything shuts down to get things like PPE to people. So,
right. Well, and for me, one of the most interesting things is, when you look at a lot of the communities in the United States that have been devastated, that had once had thriving economies, and all of that kind of disappeared. It was the extraction of manufacturing. That is a predominant story that you'll see in communities that were once thriving and no longer, is because the manufacturing that was really the core of the workforce in many of these communities disappeared. And you see places like Oakland, and we're right next to Silicon Valley and right next to San Francisco, and you would think that, from an outside perspective, everything is wonderful in the Bay Area. But it really isn't. There's been a huge equity divide for many, many years that has been growing and building. And one thing for myself that I'm very interested in trying to get a formal answer to, but for the time being, I continue to speculate, is that, we saw the decline of manufacturing, and that was definitely one thing when it became advantageous to shift all your manufacturing to China, which was various legislation that really opened that up. And that was, an extraction of resources, an extraction of opportunity. But what it led to, and this is really what got me motivated in the first place, what it led to was a removal of shop programming, of skilled trades education in schools. And it didn't all disappear at once, but it did disappear fairly quickly. It was phased out. But and for me, when we're talking about equity, manufacturing used to be the way that equity was present. It was the way in which we can, everyone has a place, everyone can get a job. There's, even if they're not glory jobs, they still paid well enough. They were typically union, and really gave people opportunities. And I hold this opinion that when we removed shop class from schools, that is actually when we began to see the largest decline in these urban areas, and the biggest increase in crime and poverty and everything else, because the model shifted from what was essentially relevant to people today. I mean, I can show someone how to change their oil in their car, or in shop class, and tomorrow you can make $20. You can go do it for your neighbor. This is a real skill. And we really shifted everyone from tangible, practical education to this kind of far-fetched idea of college is for everybody, and four-year college specifically is for everyone. And I don't argue that, four-year college, a traditional model, is advantageous for many people. And I do think that those opportunities need to be more affordable, and they need to be made available to more and more people, but not at the cost of removing all of the vocation and skilled trades programming, because not everybody has that long-term vision that can really see, okay, well, 4 years from now or 8 years from now, depending on where you're at in high school, all of this stuff that I'm learning is going to be relevant, and I'm going to be able to apply the Pythagorean theorem, and it's all going to make sense one day. And when we shifted away from kind of that vocational education, all of a sudden, all these things that did make sense, that were directly applied to what you were learning, all just become this long, far off idea. And so by removing all of that vocational programming, it removed a ton of opportunities we're seeing decline in graduation rates. There's just more and more people that are failing out, or have no motivation to be in school in the first place. Shop class used to be the thing that kept a lot of people interested, and it's also been an amazing tool to turn people on to the fields like engineering or architecture or mechanical design. Anything in that realm. Like, there's so many people that have those careers now that said, yeah, shop class was the thing that turned me on. And so it wasn't about just removing this blue collar, low skilled opportunities to people. It was removing that motivation that gets everyone turned on for these engineering degrees and engineering professions that are so heavily in demand, and we see a ton of investment going into getting people prepared for these things. But a lot of that focus and energy and money isn't going towards the things that inspired people to care about engineering in the first place.
No, that's absolutely it. And that fires on several aspects of economic development. Excuse me, whether or not we're looking at sectoral interdependencies as well from a business perspective. When manufacturing goes away, it takes away all the rest of the supply chain that goes with it. There were used to be people that made the things that got used in the factories to make things. And so you've got a couple different layers of economic void that happen when manufacturing disappears. That's only from the business opportunity perspective, let alone where the skills, the types of training that come along with having a bank of factories. The one thing that's amazing about the East Bay is you can see the old bones from the old economy very clearly. There's factories everywhere, and now they've become workspaces. But what we have seen at the same time is that underskilling, almost the disappearance that you talk about. It's a systemic problem where we looked at the comparative advantage of one industry, and it was cheaper to make something over there, so we shipped it off, and we took all the roots and the berries with it.
Yeah.
From an economic perspective, what you're then doing is knock-on effects in several other industries where you take out the employment capacity and you wipe out the possibility and the opportunity for small and local businesses who particularly are reliant on factories that might be around, whether or not they're serving them or using the stuff that they make for their own stuff. Right. One of the things you also mentioned in there is this capacity for the area to make for its own, and you've seen a lot of this come out in, I think, gardening, where people are more than happy to kind of, especially in the last few months, be able to provide for themselves because the grocery stores are wiped. And that ability to self-provision is very parallel to the ability to self-teach, which is what shop class used to bring us. It's real competency in understanding how to do something. What does it look like when I build? And then what are the spillover effects if I build something, if I either sell it or learn the next set of skills? Mm-hmm. And what I learned more than anything else while kind of working in economic development in the UK is how important apprenticeships were and how much we're missing the relationship that the guilds used to give us. What shop class did was, Mr. So-and-so that helped you make a broom and a dustpan, it accepted you and it made you feel confident and competent in a skill and a thing. And that kind of self-provisioning, again, you see it in gardening, you see it in a lot of the kind of the food first movement, where if you can grow your own stuff, if you can make your own stuff, there's a massive self-confidence piece that directly leads to economic agency. And in places like Oakland, where there's been, and very much in parts of the UK, where there's been a disjuncture in the transition of the economy, where we've gone from one thing to the other without training and caring for and preparing for what that transition is going to look like, you just leave bodies. You absolutely leave bodies and families on the road. And what happens is those kids that were going to be the next, whatever the factory or whatever the manual labor was going to be, increasingly it's been construction, they don't get the training, but they also don't get the mentorship, they don't get the community belonging, they don't get the history and the legacy, and it really just destabilizes the community altogether. And so one of the things that I absolutely love about the way you hear people talk about manufacturing was very much how kids were making sure that we trained our children and we brought them up in a culture, and they were responsible for learning where they come from. Like we always make, in some of the big cities, we get a little snotty about, people that talked about the way things were for their parents, because we live in innovation and new times, and we always have to be new. But what we miss as an economic development principle in that apprenticeship and training and mentorship is teaching our children how skills evolve, where they come from. And yes, eventually you might just be a programmer at the other end of it. But manufacturing was really a culture, more than anything else. And with the reinstallation of Fab Labs, or similar types of places where you can go again to make together, that's one of the first things you see is collaboration and collisions happening everywhere. A guy does one piece, a woman does another piece, and boom, there you've got a new product. And that is what economic democracy looks like if we allow it, right? So the ability to say us together are going to start, I find the idea that we will consume everything that we produce. We'll produce everything that we consume. I always say it wrong. That's a hard one for me.
Sure.
And I always go through the register of types of consumer products. Would we make that? Would we make that? And obviously there's some bits in there that probably do have comparative advantage to be done someplace else.
Sure.
But if we think about, just a small portion of it, just starting that and what that might do to an economy that then gets to spiral up to the next possible thing, just that theory, just the possibility of making something in the first instance, not only do you get those kind of community impacts of being able to show your kid a trade. That's a huge thing. That's such a huge thing for culture. But you also get economic resiliency in that we fire a lot more cylinders because we've got people that can actually do something. They don't have to wait around for someone to select them to get a job. But we've also got that kind of stochastic potential of, you make a thing and it becomes another thing once somebody else gets involved. Right. And so your economy continues to evolve. Your economy continues to be dynamic and exciting because somebody just put, ice cream and coffee, and now you've got a new drink. It's a similar thing in the Fab Labs.
Yeah.
And so when we shuttered a lot of those shop classes, I think we see a real hit in the way that we teach as well. We don't have a take it apart engineering kind of picture anymore. Increasingly, it's starting to come back, but you can see in economic history where stuff just got made and it got brought to me. And many of us grew up with, a piece of meat on a styrofoam plate wrapped in plastic. And that's what cows do,
Right.
So,
that's what a cow is,
Exactly. Exactly. That's where your hamburger comes from. So it's that deconstruction of where things come from, how they get made, what you might do, that I think is the root and the seed of innovation as well. If you are never taught how things get done, you don't know which processes to improve, and right. where things could venture off into a new and exciting way. I think you see that a lot in the tech economy, obviously, because that's their deal. But the ability to come back with those eyes of potential, that deconstruction, that ability to say, anything is possible, I think is some of the values that we've really lost as we've lost the culture of production.
Well, and just that last statement is interesting because all of this movement started at MIT when they created the first Fab Lab in 2001, and then created a course called How to Make Almost Anything. Yeah. So it really is like tapping into like everything is a possibility, and the tools and the technologies are evolving dramatically. And really what I'm trying to do with the FabCity idea and this, extremely ambitious statement of producing everything you consume is to really kind of just dangle that in front of people and get people to question. It's like, no. It makes no sense for us to produce these things here. Like, it doesn't make sense. We don't have the raw material. We don't have the right machines, and what you end up realizing when you really start to look at how things are made is that everything is destroying the planet. You're destroying the people that are producing the things. Like, and
that's it.
That only happens when you look at how things are made.
It's a shakeup. It's a shakeup of consciousness as well. If what you're used to is seeing meat come on a styrofoam plate, then that's how it is. And
Right.
what's interesting to me is how innovation is allowed in some sectors, but it's not in another, or it's defined very narrowly. Can I talk about what you guys did with the All Bay Area PPE a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you guys came together, you made a bunch of masks and shields, and you used tons of people from around the Bay Area to do it. And to me, I get misty eyed, because it really is an example of just absolutely coming at a problem and attacking it from not only a design perspective, but also from the possibility, right? Like, you don't just wait for China and to get you your masks. You don't just say, oh well, golly gee, there's not enough, we'll just sit here. There's actually that reignition of the old ancient human spirit, where the economic, the natural process and the natural inclination to make and trade, like those kinds of things are basic, and we've really been removed from that for a long time. So what you guys demonstrated is that fire is there, it's right here, and you gave them a challenge, and the Bay Area stepped up. Bay Area makers were there saying, yeah, I can make stuff, watch me go.
Right.
The key piece then that shows us all is, in economic development theory in particular, we think we need to have, at least in my experience, a lot of inputs in order to have an economic development success, in order to get your city ready for investment by big companies, or to have a vibrant economy. We need tons and tons of work and investment and policy. And what I think you guys showed is kind of just what economic democracy and raw economic theory, looks like when it's practiced by local folk.
Well, and it's, you need a crisis.
Do you though? Actually, that's a really good point, because I really wish we didn't.
The conversation in this entire country has now shifted. The presidential campaign has shifted to this economic model that's returning to something we did 40 years ago, which was you do heavy investment in manufacturing done in this country. And I honestly don't think that would be as relevant of a campaigning point for the presidential election if we didn't have the pandemic. If there wasn't this realization that's like, oh shit, we're in this place where we can't even make the things that save our life. And we're talking about, a lot of our vaccines and medication is made in China that are cut off. I think at minimum that should be a requirement for this country, is that we should at least be able to make what is life-saving.
I think that's a great boundary, and it's what's possible in the local area as well. I mean, this is really the theory that bugs me the most, is that manufacturing is huge. It's giant factories with huge amounts of equipment, and it's something that takes billions of dollars of investment, and I think it seizes local policymakers up, because they don't have that kind of resource. How can I have a vibrant manufacturing sector if I don't have Ford in my city? And all of my, most of the factories around here made food. If they're all tied up being workspaces now, how can I say manufacturing is back? And what I think we've seen over the past, decade at least, is, as everybody's kind of turned their perspective to artisan and small batch and homemade and locally made, like, you can show that that's a viable level of economic activity. It's not going to change the world, unless your world is local, and it'll rocket, because it allows for 5 to 10 jobs sometimes that weren't there before. It allows for 3-5 businesses that weren't there before. And mostly what I think we saw with the All Bay Area PPE stuff is it allows for people who just love to create to actually, become a part of the economy again, which, we've missed them. They're more than welcome back, because that's the kind of amenity that people want to live near as well. People that move into places that aren't cities miss the exciting aspect of the farmer's market, or the maker fair, or the whatever street vendors that you have. Like, that's what keeps our town centers exciting. You can't get that if you don't have the consciousness from the schools, in the skills development, in business development, that these people aren't just hobbyists, they're not just randoms, they're actually creating an environment that we all like to live in as well. And that's an economy that it works not only for everyone, but it excites people to live in.
And that's I was pulled into a conversation with the city of Oakland, and it was the It was like an education equity roundtable conversation. And I showed up to, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 of these meetings where they pull in stakeholders from across the city and really try and get everyone to tackle is like, okay, we have, everyone came to this realization around education that one of the biggest pieces we have that we need to deal with is chronic absenteeism. Collectively, all of these roundtables came back to that same one piece, is like chronic absenteeism. And so everyone's now like, okay, well, how do we provide them supports, and how do we make sure people can get to school, and how do we do all these other things? And I'm like, I just stand in the back and like raise my hands like, but school sucks. Like, how do we address that? That's what and nobody wants to hear it. But I see kind of everyone like silently like, oh, good. You're bringing up this thing that we've all choose to ignore because nobody wants to acknowledge that the way in which we teach our kids is mostly irrelevant today, and not exciting.
And we lose, I think in Oakland, it's about 1/3 is what they're expecting is kids that just disappear. And the other side of that is, we do know where they are. Oftentimes, I'm not saying all people who don't go to school are ending up in jail, but there is a higher propensity of it. And if you lose them earlier on, I'll just end up doing an art project with you to reignite your interest in learning in prison instead. So why don't we actually talk about it at the educational point, keeping people engaged? And you're absolutely right to think about the fact that the less we use our hands, all of our engineers and designers and the people who like to make things then disengage. Where do they go? They go to the street oftentimes, and then we have all kinds of other problems.
Well, and once again, when we had auto shop class and we taught people how to change oil, like you had a path forward. I could make $20 tomorrow. Guess what? The opportunities that we've given everybody for the last 10, 15 years, because that's how long shop classes have been almost completely gone, has been we're not teaching you relevancy. We're not teaching you something that you can apply today. We're teaching you something that makes sense at some point in the future if you're successful. If you can get to that finish line of graduating college, then really this stuff is going to be relevant, and you're going to go out and get a job and be able to be economically viable in this community. And that's just not the case, because now the only way you make $20 is to go sell a dime bag, to go sell some weed. Like that's really what people are turning to, because that's how they know to go make a buck.
Or Uber and Lyft. I mean, and what's hidden?
That's if you have a car and can afford insurance and gas and everything else. It's like that's almost like the privileged crappy job.
What's hidden in that is exactly that cultural point that I was making. When we have people in auto shop, the built or in wood shop, and now in Fab Labs, you see that built-in set of connections that actually are the pipeline and the career ladder to getting a job or getting a contract if you're a business. The hive that circulates within there ends up with, just as you do on a daily basis, placing kids with high skills with employers that need them, helping businesses get the type of extra information that they need to be able to produce whatever piece of machinery or whatever it is that they're producing. Like those locations, especially when they're at the neighborhood level, are a natural and trusted place to talk about things like careers and business development. A lot of the times we have kids that don't want to hear about college because math is boring, school is boring, it's all boring. But if you engage them in work-based learning or in experiential learning, you engage them in learning while they produce, then you actually ignite a very deep-seated, very awesome interest that becomes a $20 to $30 an hour job. And we just don't have that structure anymore. When we lost production, we lost the faith in production, and we lost the infrastructure for production. And that goes straight down to the schools. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And when you lose the infrastructure, you lose the people. And so why can't we have this skills gap? It's a big crisis that we have a skills mismatch. Advanced manufacturers don't have the local people that they need. Well, the reason being is because we don't naturally have locations for people to learn that anymore.
Yeah, we don't. It's not actively brought into people's consciousness as they're going through their educational career. It's not a viable opportunity. And I have various stories about Oakland Unified School District and the way in which they used to structure their classrooms is every classroom, at least at certain schools, would adopt a college. And in second grade, you are the Stanford class. You're adopting the college of your teacher.
Yep.
And you're getting that college mentality from day one, which is a great thing. College is an amazing thing when you know what you want to do. When you understand the knowledge that you're gaining and what you're going to do with it, that's an amazing tool. When it is just the thing that is sold to you, whether or not you understand how to use it or what to do with it, that is where it is bad. And my wife was a second grade teacher in Oakland Unified, and she actually asked permission one year. She says, "Can I put Laney College as our college for our classroom?" She didn't go to Laney College, but it's a local college. She asked for permission. Laney College, for those who don't know, is a local community college that has a pretty good representation of skilled trades and manufacturing education there.
World class.
She was told, no, you can't do that. That is not what we want to instill in our second graders, is that community college or vocational education is a viable thing for your future.
That's a second piece of the pie. There's a real, I don't want to be rude and say it's classism, but there definitely has been a bias that's been built in. And I think what you're demonstrating is when we seek to kind of define what a fab city is, one of the first and most important principles is exactly this. It's a city approach. It's a whole village approach to saying, yeah, this is cool. This is something you should think about. This is something you could make money off of. And actually, there's jobs right now. You don't have to wait for 5 years in order to actually get this job. This is something you could do upon graduation. You could even apprentice when you're 16. And when you have a city that says, we value that, we support that, we put that into not just our curriculum, but the ways that when we gather and build social capital together, we bring it up. We allow for the, we allow for the fairs on the street that show people, look, that person over there made that, and it looks like this, and it gives people a chance to talk about it. We had hoped to bring one. You actually do school tours in the College of Alameda, don't you? You bring kids through, and in second grade, it's so life-saving and so important for so many of those kids that drop out, that third that we're talking about. In Britain, they call it not in education, employment, or training, and we start to count that at 16. The Americans here do it as well. And if you don't have that, if you don't move those numbers, you can't be considered a very successful educational system, because you're leaving behind all of those kids.
You're losing people.
So that social acceptance, not only are we co-creating and co-producing and participating in our economy, we're also saying, what, this sector is important to us, and all the little subsectors that surround it. Production is a thing that we value. And here's the different kinds of pipelines. Here's the different kinds of pathways that you can take to be able to get a job. In fact, so-and-so from over there works in this company. He can hook you up. That is something that a citywide approach, an institutional approach to manufacturing and production continues to allow for, rather than cutting that off, saying, no, you can't go there. You need to go here because of our bias.
Right. And it's, it's bias driven. And I highlight, once again, I like to say things and highlight things that no one else wants to, yet most people actually very much respect that it gets brought up. It's just no one else wants to risk their job for saying the wrong thing. I'm lucky. I haven't had a job for 15 years. so I'm never really worried about losing. I'm never really worried about losing my job, because, I found a way to always make a living for myself.
Let's stop there, actually. That's exactly the type of hustle that manufacturing and production, especially now, allows for. And the ability to say, I can make something and sell it. That's something that we've been divorced from quite a bit. That's another thing. There's so much money spent on entrepreneurship training and bringing entrepreneurship into communities that might not have such a big business stock or a big business community, and reigniting entrepreneurship. Well, it's not gone. It's whether or not it's acceptable. And the fact that your consciousness was shaped to say, it's cool, I can hustle, I can figure it out, is probably the second most important principle after culture in a fab city, that says, not only can you make it, but you can sell it, and you can actually make money doing that. You don't have to try so hard teaching kids about entrepreneurship as a theory, as a possibility. Business development doesn't look like that weird thing that they do in Silicon Valley where they invent really cool speakers, right? Like, it's something that says, my grandma used to make pies and sell them. That's entrepreneurship. And so it's taking it back to, again, a very economic, a very democratic principle that says your economy should be shaped by you. that's not a skill that we've kept.
Right. Well, and when you look into the educational model, and I think that, what I'm going to present here actually is relevant across our bureaucracies. So all of our local cities, city governments, and everything else, is that look at the professional path that every one of those people, every single person in school that you are exposed to as a student, from your kindergarten, from all of your teachers, to all of your principals, to all of your vice principals, to all of your counselors, to everybody, probably with the exception of the janitor, what career pathway did they choose? They're all required to enter that with a college degree. You cannot get the job without the college degree in the first place. So everyone that is influencing the education of all of these young minds and students, they all actually, they may have found different ways to get there, but they all took the same path. They all went to 4-year college. You can't do this without that degree. And I think, just like most jobs in city government, at least any position that has any influence, the garbage man doesn't need a college degree, but the person who's supervising the garbage man does need to have the college degree. And so everybody who's making the decisions about everybody else, you don't actually have representation. When we talk about equality, you need to have a bunch of people that became entrepreneurs right away, that hustled to figure out life without a college degree, in on the educational decisions that are made, in on the policy decisions that are made, because that is an entirely separate point of view that is almost never invited to the table.
And this is the third region that I've worked in where we've had a deep discussion about career training and career advisors, and what's the role of people who help to start to think, kids to start to think about where they're going to go. And the Bay Area in particular has a lot of what we call the promise programs, where you get a children's savings account, and then you have a huge, just as you were saying, you have a huge college identification program. That's what Oakland promises. There's another couple of them around here, and they're amazing. They're exactly right. However, when it comes to the third, when it comes to the lot that probably won't go that way, or excuse me, even some of the kids that might go to college but still will come back and become engineers that make things after they've created a huge debt for themselves.
Right.
One of the things that we've really fallen behind on, and this is again what a whole city approach allows us to do, is to kind of manifest what it looks like when you have a career guidance session done by somebody else that hasn't gone to college first and went through a VC path and eventually started their own company. And even if they have a salon or a spa, it's still a $250,000 startup. Sometimes it's really big. So really kind of bringing it back to, I made this dustpan. Now I'm going to sell a bunch of dustpans. That's something that kids can understand. That career path and how to guide kids hasn't really been, as at least from what we hear from our partners. And again, this is the third region that I've heard it in, that hasn't made its way back into the way that advice is structured and the way that the program that kids receive for career advice and guidance is geared and oriented. You just don't get it that way.
When the vast majority of your counselors are coming right out of college, they just received their counseling degree. They're qualified to now teach you. It's like, well, yeah, but you actually need to go find the dude who's had 50 careers. That is the best career counselor you'll ever get.
The failures of the city.
Who tells you, yeah, you don't want to do this stuff. This is not good, or this is really good if you know these things, but you don't want it. People who haven't done all of these things, haven't been exposed to all of these job opportunities and actually put their hands on these experiences, they should not be the one telling everyone else what to do with their life. They should
that speaks so perfectly to a whole city approach, because it's also materializing business back into school. It goons me out. It upsets me quite a bit that there's such a chasm between the employer and the student. The shortest distance between 2 points is a direct line. Why do we not bring and it's really funny because you'll hear a lot of education staff say, "Oh, woe's me, I can't get businesses who don't have time to come into schools." So why don't we take the kids to them more often, which is what an apprenticeship program is supposed to do, is kind of expose them early on. We do a great bunch of tours across the Bay Area, actually, for Manufacturing Week, where lots of different organizations fire up, and they, you know,
Hmm.
they bring kids on site. There's really cool times when we all come together and do lift it up. And I think those are just small glimpses of what we could be doing all the time. Why does it have to be a week?
Hmm.
And it is that reinfiltration back into not just education, but in some of the other youth programs that are out there that says, you know, you're eventually going to have to get a job. Let's talk about that in the round across all the sectors, not just the ones that we think are the highest paying or you should go into because you are X.
Right.
One of the things I think that Oakland does well is just because of its roots, again, has really good infrastructure that if you happen to find it, there's what 3 or 4 different programs, youth training programs that help kids build and produce and create. And I know most of them track how many, you know, long-term job placements that they have. I think the success of that career and technical education would probably be a little bit more effective as early pipeline tasters, just to get the orientation and to kind of, again, provide that cultural touch point to how production can manifest in your life. How can you be somebody involved in production, whether you're going to do beer or outfits? Where does that begin, and how do we demonstrate that that's an important thing? Those career sessions are some of the most important. I'll never forget one of the entrepreneurship programs that I evaluated. All 25 of the kids had said no. They were all scary. It takes too much money. I'll never run a business because it's too much money and it's too much time, and everybody that came in to talk to us was stressed out. I think that's probably true. However,
Yep.
to have just, you know, come into Laney or the College of Alameda and kind of hung out and made a doohickey that, you know, then becomes something that they sell to each other, probably would have introduced that in a little bit more softer fashion.
But and within that context, within that model, you're not doing it by yourself.
Precisely.
You're right. You don't need to go get a $50,000 loan to buy some equipment and, you know, and you know, start leasing a building in order to set up and run your business.
Yep.
You can just start doing something, and then when you mess up, there's someone looking over your shoulders like, hey, let me help you with that. Let me give some advice. And now you're like, hey, is this good enough to sell? I'm like, I don't know. Why don't you put it up on Etsy? See what happens. Like, you know, it doesn't even take a lot of effort to really kind of dip your toe in. But once you sell one thing, and then you're like, oh, well, that's sold. And I got 6 other people looking at these things. I'm like, oh, well, this person just said, well, yeah, but can you make it in blue? I'm like, sure, I can make it in blue. I will, you know, I'll tailor this thing just for you now if it means you're going to buy one.
And that's a component of the city. Put that into our list. That's precisely a component of the city where the institutions then say, you have a natural economic process that's occurring. You can actually see people who are on their own doing this thing. How do we build that into our strategy? How do we actually look at our whole economy and say, okay, that's valuable. We should make space for that in our libraries. The thing that I love about the Bay Area is that it just kind of naturally does that. You know, that you have neighborhood centers of production, whether it's the Fab Lab or the Tool Library or, you know, this or that hacker and maker thing that's happening in the gymnasium. And that kind of energy to me tells me production is back, because the whole city gets behind it and says, as an institution, whether I'm a college or a high school, whether I'm a boys and girls club, I will bring this here. And it's effectively a career and training moment, but it's super fun and super cool. And we can, you know, teach the kids that this is something you can do not only to make a job, but also to make your spirit happy.
Right. And when you empower people with knowledge about how to do things, how to make things, how to produce things, like, you instill this almost civic duty. And this is actually part of my I'm going to say problem with all the PPE stuff and to make me and the All Bay Area PPE production that we end up doing. It's like, I can't actually sit on the sidelines while all of this chaos is raining down on us when I actually understand, you know, when I have power and knowledge to do something about it. Like, it becomes my civic duty. I can do something about this, therefore I'm going to. And that was it. And you know, I didn't know what to do exactly when I started, but you start staring at a problem, you understand who the players are, you try to, you know, consume as much information as you can to really understand what the problem is and where the bottlenecks are, and start to then innovate and say, well, I can insert myself here, or, oh, wait a minute, we're missing this one component. I know somebody who knows how to do that. Let me call them right now. And you know, when all that started, I was on I think it was 11-day bender. Like literally, I was on a bender for 11. I nearly got divorced in the middle of it because 20 hours of my day every day for 11 days straight was dedicated to spinning up production, was focusing on that problem because I knew I could do something about it. I had power. And I wanted to express that power. I wanted to flex that power because I had the knowledge and that civic duty was just there. It's like when you know how to address these things, you can't stand on the sidelines. You can't just wait for someone else to fix it for you.
If I could do a comic book, an economic comic book, I don't know if anybody would let me. Unleash the Makers is that moment that we had there. And there was so much to me that was so fascinating because as I was hearing in kind of one part of my ear where, oh my God, we're all doomed. This is so scary. Schools are closed now. All these things are terrible. You know, you're seeing all these things online. And then I watched, 200, 300 of all of you just invent 2 factories, just invent them. You just found some space and you use them. Fixing a problem that seemed out of control, everybody needed masks, and to watch the response, the hospitals trusted you right away. The homeless organizations that needed it. Yes, please, right now.
No one was asking for a certificate of insurance or or inspection certificate or none of that. Like, because everyone was like desperate.
There's roles for that.
All to the side.
I think what you guys have proved then is that the economy isn't so hard. Economic development is not something that is really important, that lots of, I'm going to say it, men in suits need to come with big, deep capital and until we have all of those inputs aligned, which is what economic theory mostly teaches. If you don't have these 7 things lined up in such a way, you won't get growth. I think number one, what you guys showed us is that when the city rallies together or the region rallies together, it can understand that a lot of what normally look like coordination problems or investment problems or issues where you have an unequal planning so that you can't do something here or there. I think you guys showed us that, number one, crises can be solved. Like, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm an old lady and I feel so desperate sometimes because we just get crisis after crisis after crisis of capitalism, right?
We're buried in a blanket of wildfire smoke right now here in the Bay Area. Like, it was record heat wave that ended yesterday. It was like record heat wave, and then the next crisis is here, and we're probably going to be looking at drought soon. Like we're going to be back in that.
There. Yeah. It's the nature. And I think definitely for a lot of us, you get that paralysis where you're just like, good God, there's nothing that's okay. Everything is such a mess right now. And what the production mindset gives you is what you've just demonstrated is, you got to find a way. You got to figure it out. You definitely use your friends and your connections. Your city, your community is actually really important to making that way for you and helping you to kind of link the right inputs such that even if it's a small and modest output, you know a guy in your tech shop or in your fab lab that can help you with this or that. And so not only do we get kind of a solution in a crisis, which is a really simple way to kind of represent what you guys did. But you can also kind of say, oh gosh, those barriers aren't so fixed after all. Oh, so you don't have a factory? Well, you can't produce. Well, you guys just took a factory, just, and by
space and built it.
Yeah. And by saying, right, we're only going to have it for a few weeks. We'll only have it for a few months and we'll just do what we can while we can. Like, that's the kind of grit that we're going to need to deal with things like the 50-year, 100-year flood that's actually going to happen very soon. That's the kind of mindset that we're going to need as we change the economy over into a much more carbon neutral way of production. Like, we just need to be able to unleash the makers so that we can start to deconstruct. The last thing I think that it showed us too was how willing everybody was. And this is what a fab city looks like when it's humming and production is supported in all of the corners. It allowed us to say that with each little bit, you guys made a stone soup. You had this person with that and this person with that and Coke with a bit of plastic and Samsung with this or that. And everybody came together. where is that as an economic asset on a regular basis? Why is it always a crisis that we have to wait for? So I think kind of the demonstration gives us not only, just in time production and evidence that can work, that we can make our own stuff, especially if it's really important, but that we can come together through a culture of support and mutualism and say, no, together is the point. Producing it is the other point, and that equals economic development. It's a very different approach.
Well, and it just kind of reminds me of something we've seen pretty relevant. We've seen quite a bit in the last, I don't know, I'm going to say 5 to 10 years. There's been more and more focus on buying local. Let's buy local. Like go support your local business. And these are all great ideas, but if that local business just bought everything from China and they're just reselling it to you, that is not what buying local should be. That is not what we should be supporting. Because there's just a middleman who's getting a buck who happens to live in the neighborhood. That's it. It needs to go back. It's like, no, they can resell something that someone else produces, but someone else local should be making that in the first place. And that's what a buy local policy should be. It's not just buy from someone who owns it locally, but someone who actually produced it locally.
That goes back to the roots and berries of manufacturing as well. What are the supporting supply chains? How is it that we probably shouldn't get into this at this point, but the toilet paper problem, right? That was a problem of the way factories are designed. Factories are not designed to shift to consumer production, to consumer sizes and quantities on a dime. Are we looking then at moving more towards, because it's clear that we need to? I don't even want to talk about the food chain and the supply chain within where we had to throw away all that food. Those pictures killed me. So if it's not going to be a big sweeping full revolution where everything comes back home from China and we do it all here, at least we can maybe look at some key principles and key design principles and kind of the benefits that we want to build in this time, such that the transformation, which we're going to have to make whether we like it or not. My bank, the CEO of my bank just came out and said, look, if it's not a good investment for climate change, maybe we should think about it then. And that is huge. So if the banks are down, then the transformation is coming, and the local economy will be the place where it really gets fought, because that's where these emergencies are going to happen increasingly. And that's where the land is. That's where the factories are. So if we have neighborhood production facilities like a Fab Lab or a community college that's stacked up and able to produce, then we can really reconsider how serious these crises are, what our possibilities are for not only upskilling our kids to handle this, because it's not just an architecture problem. It's not just a problem that big college brains need to deal with. It's going to be a problem that the person who builds the thing, the housing in particular, is going to need to change. And so giving that full paradigm shift across the city and across the institutions to be able to say, no, we have a fabrication oriented city where we support this sector, all the dependent sectors, and all the businesses and the skills that come out of it is the only way, I think, is what you guys have demonstrated, that we should be doing economic development.
Well, and where I can, when I first introduced the idea of FabCity to new people, to new audiences, I always kind of precurse it with like, yes, I understand. I sound like I'm insane. I completely understand if I truly think that we can produce everything we consume locally. The logical mind just looks at me and says, you're insane. You're absolutely crazy, because we need the lithium from Chile. Like, we can't have lithium batteries without the lithium we mine out of the ground. It's like, well, but what can you do? How can you get the same end results with things that you do have that are locally available to? And it's when you really instill that innovation, like, okay, we're looking to actively solve these problems and not accepting the industry as it is. I'm not accepting that electric cars have to, or cars in general have to be something that is sourced from all corners of the planet. Like, I'm not accepting that reality. Yes, it may be our reality that we live in today, but there by no means does it need to stay that way for the next 20 years. I think 5-10 years from now, we can see a huge shift in the way in which we use our materials. And when we relocalize, when we bring that manufacturing back, all of a sudden we have to stop ignoring all of the externalities of our manufacturing systems.
Yes.
Because it happens in your backyard. You don't want that smokestack blowing up, over your house. You don't want all of that, waste going into your local water stream. Like it's just you can't have that.
Or the landfill.
Yeah, or the the landfill is a problem. Like the U.S. is the worst when it comes to landfill issues, I think, because we're actively shipping our garbage and recycling off to other countries.
Not anymore. Nobody wants it.
Nobody wants it anymore. That's another thing. But it's really like at failure. So sorry for just striving towards this FabCity vision through this 2054 timeline for at least 50% locally produced goods of production of everything. Let's strive for that. Let's make a true, genuine effort to get there. We may fail miserably, but if we produce 10% of everything we consume locally, all of a sudden that is a massive shift from our economic model of today. We're lucky if we're probably hitting 2, 3, 4% in local production here in the Bay Area. And so let's just that tiny movement from 4 or 5% to 10% to 15%, and even if it takes us 30 years, that is a huge economic shift, huge that happens here, and we get all of the benefits. And when we solve a problem, when we figure out how to completely reinvent the raw materials that go into the product in the first place, and we come up with a way to extract, grow algae, extracting carbon out of the air, and then turning that algae into a plastic or turning that into a fuel or whatever it may be, then we share that knowledge with other people in other places. And now the most beneficial climate change, issues the things that we can tackle, that is actually the best way to address these problems that we're experiencing, is figure out how to do it with what you have locally, and then share that knowledge once you attain it.
And I think there's two pieces in there. One is figure out how to do it and with what you have locally. Like, I just don't feel like we do crisis deconstruction that way. I think we don't take apart a problem from the simplest and easiest. Oftentimes we blab about it for a really long time. We've been blabbing about climate change since I was born, since you were born.
Sure.
And here we are. And, racial equity is another one. Systemic racism is one of my favorites. I mean, ain't nothing new. It's just a matter of doing something. And I think your community is, and work-based learning in general, really teaches you that principle, that sitting around behind a table, theorizing and blabbing is actually not what solves it. What solves it is getting your hands dirty and getting in there and trying something, throwing it up against the wall, seeing if it fails. If it mostly fails, that's cool. Capture the lessons and move on. That's experiential learning. Right. And the ability to kind of make policy like that, the ability to design economic strategy like that, allows us to do what you're saying. And the second piece is taking stock from the assets that we have and growing from there. Not saying, oh, well, our economic strategy is going to be to bring in X, 3 big box markets and they're going to give us jobs. Because if you've actually created, 3, 4 jobs from a fab lab, then that's a healthy, resilient economy, because not only does it stay in the community more often than not, it's not reliant on somebody who doesn't live in the community to actually make decisions about cuts and whether or not that job's going to be there next year. I mean, one of the brilliant pieces of the Green Jobs Act that came out in kind of a lot of the Green New Deal is just redoing windows, taking windows out and replacing them with efficient windows. And for me, that's such a not exciting, mundane task that solves so many things. And not only does it give a bunch of people jobs, but it reduces a lot of energy usage, right? But it's so boring, and you would never see it written up in a strategy except for, a few times. So it's that back to basics approach that I think makers and people in production offer us, that's just brings us down out of the clouds, brings us right to a CNC machine and says, we'll invent tomorrow. It's not hard. Here's a manual. You can do this first bit and see where you get to. That is a set of principles that are just not, I don't think, in my experience, in economic development anymore.
Well, and that's spoken from someone who hasn't probably changed a window before.
Yes, that's true.
There's nothing boring about it. I'm not saying it's an enjoyable task. But it's not boring. There's plenty to keep yourself busy when you're doing it.
No, but you're not flying to Davos. You're not blabbing on, big conferences. There's no $1 trillion inward investment win off of it. You get it from 1,000 people doing one small thing. That's how you get the big impact. And I think that's what design and building and construction teaches us more than anything else, is that you have to do something. And it's not going to be perfect, but you have to try.
Right. If you're not actively making those efforts to make things better, to improve your life, to improve the lives of your neighbors, to address the challenges around us, then I don't understand what you're doing. There's no reason for existing if because we're surrounded by problems. We're surrounded by problems that need to be addressed and solved.
That reminds me, we left out one big thing of FabCity, which is that community of practice approach as well. I think increasingly policymakers and institutional people, managers that kind of run things and design things for us, whether it's the economy or the way our politics are set up, they don't necessarily share as much. The most common thing you'll always hear is, oh, we're in silos, we're so broken down, we don't actually integrate as well as we need to. I think it's in every industry I've ever worked. I think one of the things that a FabCity offers is the ability to have that conversation with each other. Right. This particular strategy did this. It was okay. We fell short, but we really loved this piece. And to be able to contribute that to a mass change movement really allows for that experiential aspect to come back home and be picked up and utilized the next time. That's something I think that academically we don't try as much as you guys do experientially, and that's just a totally different way to tackle a crisis.
I mean, everything's in silos, and the city of Oakland, for the longest time, economic development and workforce development weren't really on the same page. They weren't pushing the same agenda. But now there is a little bit of a resurgence of having that coordination happening, but they're not actively coordinating with Oakland Unified School District. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge problem, because that is your future workforce. And if you're doing workforce development and economic development, you need to include the people who are going to be responsible for these things in 5 years and 10 years. But it's because the city of Oakland and the school district in Oakland are two separate entities entirely. Mm-hmm. And so they're not actively agreeing that manufacturing is a focus, which is a new economic development model and focus for the city of Oakland. And at least they're bringing workforce development along with them this time and saying, okay, we're going to focus on this. They're not sitting at the table with OUSD and saying, how do we bring manufacturing, training, and education into your schools? They might have the conversation to let them know what they're doing, but they're not actively trying to rebuild shop class in order to support this manufacturing paradigm that they're trying to bring into play. And it's that disconnect, and that's where a FabCity perspective. And I feel like I'm the embodiment of this, because I can have that conversation. This idea of producing everything you consume traverses everything. It goes across all of our sectors. It goes across all of our bureaucracies. Everybody needs to be involved, and this one concept gives us a reason for everyone to be sitting at that same table.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right. And what you've taught me, I think, is the fact that you can take a sector and rally around it. We do it in such a weird way. Like I said, it's always, big inputs and big hoo-has and big car factories that we actually say that, that's our success. But what you guys have taught is that very much justice is in the details. Very much the success is in the details. Have you got your local institutions on board to an agenda, all thinking about it in the same way and sharing about it in similar ways, in such a way that everybody's willing to just try something? There's an exchange, you're following it all the way through. I think they've done that with a lot of cool programs, but I don't think we've seen a proper sector lifted up. And except for the tech sector, I think we've done it for tech quite a bit. There's tons of curriculum aligned to becoming a programmer. Everybody said, oh my God, that's the best paying job in the whole wide world. Let's do it. We need to work on equity. So there's all this energy making sure that, as a new sector, it's getting all these things. Manufacturing, I think, could be exalted in a similar way. Coordination, I think, is that key word. And oftentimes funders don't pay attention to that. You fund training or you fund, business support. But the funding of partnerships and coalition building and coordination and the actual glue that makes an economy happen, particularly a circular economy, if that's what you're after, is so massive. And it's an ignored input. It's an input that usually people just assume occurs. But going back to your silo point, it doesn't. There's so much going on. And with government cut down to the bone at this point, you don't have the employees that you used to be able to say, I'm going to pick this sector up and nurture it in a way that isn't just getting, money to say, let's change facades over for the businesses, or let's add more, local folks employed in businesses. It actually pays attention to the preconditions and the ecosystem aspects and who needs to be at the table first versus later, who's complementary to having this particular initiative done then. And what I think you guys have also showed off is that there's a lot of non-traditional players that are left out. Mm-hmm. And so there's places, career advising is a really good one, where you could be launching and unleashing the makers right there. But because those career advisors don't have the business connections, or they don't have the industry connections, right, then they aren't introducing into, to kids the things that we want. So the city approach to production, the FabCity, really takes a look at that glue between the players and how important it is that, those 3 design meetings on this particular topic, whether it be employment or business or starting up a new factory over there, those 3 meetings actually need to happen, and those 27 people need to be there. Like, there's not a lot of value in that. And I think that's probably one of the most important things you could fund.
Yep. Well, and I hope Autodesk is listening, because that's on the table right now. It's trying to get them to realize that is a viable investment to be made, is that coordination and facilitation in order to get everyone on the same page in the first place.
It is. Again, it takes it right back to participation and people power, and producing everything we consume includes the economy.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and it's just about empowering people. Like for me, FabCity is purely an empowerment tool. I want to empower people through, speaking to them in a very motivational way, but also then putting them in front of a machine, giving them access to skills and to training, and putting their hands on something. And letting them understand that everyone has this innate ability to solve problems. We can, and I think physically solving those problems is the best way to solidify that understanding for people, because I'm now working on physical things, but really I'm working on building the idea, non-physical. But I wouldn't have the patience, I wouldn't have the wherewithal, or the energy even to try to address these things that I can't see, and I may never even see the full value of of the fruits of my labor, because I won't be around when it really comes into play. But it's because I, from a young age, was able to solve problems with my hands. I could physically solve them, and therefore now I can virtually solve them. I can focus on this big idea because I know that I have an ability to solve problems, and I can share that with other people. And nearly every person I ever bring into a Fab Lab, they learn that. They learn that they have a power to solve problems.
This is one of my favorite topics too, and I think we touched on it earlier, but what we didn't get to is to highlight one of Alameda's amazing schools, Myelin, that has an arts-based curriculum. And to me, I thought, oh, good, everybody's going to learn how to paint. We're going to see why it's really important to have maybe some music. But what I've watched over the past few years is they really are teaching how to create. And that's, again, something that I don't think it's been lost. I think we definitely see a resurgence for those that have the privilege to be able to do that. But it's not something that's on the tip of everybody's fingers. The studio habits of mind, where you contemplate something and you try something and then you observe it and then you evaluate it and then you revise it and then you think about it. I mean, you guys went through all of those steps in the PPE project. It would be a similar deal if you guys tackled housing, where, let's try what modular does for homelessness. There's a few attempts here and there, but, look at the tiny homes that Lainey built. You just did it. And it was that chance to create and say, well, what if we do it this way? What are our observations to be able to put it back? I really feel like the economy should be something that's co-created. It's not something that, you're given.
Not a plan that is driven by your economic development people that are hired to do that for you.
That's right.
Everyone is a participant in.
Or whether or not business wants to locate there, do you have the right labor? Do you have the right, assets in order to bring our workforce to you? The right amount of parking. What you've asked for a long time that I think is such a good question is, how do our kids learn how? Do our kids learn the ability to take something and make it out of nothing? And there is a conversation that's that's embedded in whether or not shop class and is available to them to do that. But now that I've seen it from an elementary school perspective and as a pedagogy, as a way that we understand the curriculum, it's a very different approach, and it could be, I think it would fast forward us in a lot of ways. And you see it in adult education as well, increasingly. You know, it's that we only see it, funny enough, we only see it in restorative and rehabilitative education when it's done kind of en masse. You see, you know, somebody who's out of touch with their feelings, they're angry, they've been through trauma. There's the first thing we give them is art. We help them recreate their life.
Therapeutic, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
You need a reset. Just kind of go in and like put your hands on something, and
modeling clay. If we took the economy in a similar fashion, I know that we would actually have a lot more vibrancy. And then you layer in all the inputs like access to capital and, you know, financial sustainability and property management. You know, all of those inputs are massively important. And again, that takes us back to the city. If the city says we are going to zone this area to be a manufacturing friendly area, similar to what Oakland's done with their strategy, then you can see how the city catalyzes that natural and innate inclination to create. But what I think the East Bay really demonstrates is that it is kind of a life cycle, and it's multiplicity. It's across different types of institutions. It doesn't just happen in economic development. It very much happens in elementary school, and the ability to kind of align that is what and coordinate that is the benefit of FabCity.
Well, I'm gonna cut us off here because just remind you, I was like, you're kind of questioning, could we fill an hour? And I actually think that maybe one day we'll do an extended version of this and just kind of let it go until we've got a dry mouth.
Well, you know, it's one of my favorite topics.
Right. Yeah. No. And it's intriguing and exciting. And yes, I've dedicated my life to this stuff, so I can obviously talk about it for quite some time. So, is there anything? Let's see. Maybe I'll try something a little quirky here. Let's just leave this with, tell me the thing that you have made that you were most proud of.
Do I make anything? No, I just theorize around it.
Did you make dinner? Did you make the best Thanksgiving dinner of your life, when you were 23? Or
no, I get to do some of my husband makes bread. I get to do some of his kneading and watching sometimes. But no, I did not get in on the quarantine sourdough craze. I do not make the masks, none of it. I just proselytize and say it's one of the most important economic development strategies I can imagine. So perhaps what I am is simply a civil architect. I just help make society.
There you go. And, you got a lot of more work on your hands there.
That's it. 2 thumbs. That's what I have. I'll just exalt those of you who can.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Shawnee. We were able to do this because we've had plenty of conversations around this topic before. So now it's just officially going on record.
All right. Well, I need a picture in front of those tools someday.
All right. It's in my garage. Not too far.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
Bye.